Well, hey, Waspeteers, it's your old pal King Waspinator. Welcome back to Total Party Skills. Often one of the most overlooked aspects of the World of Darkness, which is kind of strange considering like how out front it is with the concept, is that in these games you are playing monsters. Not misunderstood monsters, monsters. White Wolf player characters are bad guys. The characters from Werewolf the Apocalypse, no exception at all. Of course, they frame themselves as being great heroic beings who are out to save the world against insurmountable odds and all that kind of stuff, but many of their problems are actually really originally of their own making, and their arrogance dooms them and all around them. And I'm going to go through kind of just a series of just kind of breaking down various Garou tribes, other changing breeds, and other aspects of Werewolf the Apocalypse. Might lump some things together, might occasionally have a video about one singular tribe or whatever, but for now, I'm going to start off with what I would consider to be the 5 worst Garou tribes of the Western Concordiate. By worst, I don't mean having like the lamest concept or having the weakest powers. By worst, I mean these are the 5 tribes that arguably undermine the stated goals and intentions of the Western Concordiate Alliance of Tribes and their ongoing centuries-old struggle against the worm. And so, no particular order, I'm going to start off with the Black Furies. They pop up very first in the book. They're the all-female, mostly asterisk tribe. Now, since the time the 20th anniversary Werewolf the Apocalypse came out, we've had a few little shifts in what is considered culturally acceptable, so it's still going by this particular iteration of the Black Furies. I guess you can kind of accuse them of being the TERFs of Werewolf the Apocalypse. The only males they allow in to the tribe are their own Metis offspring, because they have a harder time pawning Metis children off onto other tribes than they would if they have a male-born werewolf son. That's a bit easier to, make a deal with the children of Gaia or the Glasswalkers or, someone that they have somewhat good relations with who, take the cub in and raise them as their own. In much the same way that the Black Furies, despite being mostly descended from Amazon-esque women of ancient Greece and Anatolia, they've absorbed other women from other tribes who just, got tired of whatever kind of patriarchal bullshit was going on in the other tribes' pact structures and sept structures, and ended up joining with the Black Furies. Obviously, you can go the Ginger Snaps route and say that there is, like some analogies for female werewolves and the Black Furies in general, of it kind of being like an analogy for female puberty and the changes that come with every full moon. But, it applies to werewolves across the line, and it's not like there's not female werewolves in all the other tribes. It's not like all female werewolves have to be Black Furies. Also, it's easy to fall into the idea that, they're just, man-hating werewolf ladies who don't need no wolf man kind of shit going on. And, there is certainly that aspect to them, but that's not all of them. I mean, they are, carrying on just like an ancient tradition of warrior ladies, to some degree or another. Problem with them, and why probably I get them out of the way first, because they might be the mildest in this, but a theme amongst all 5 of the tribes I'm going to be talking about in this video is the purity angle that a lot of them have, for one thing or another. For the Black Furies, of course, it's this absolute rejection of the male side of their bloodlines, which, reduces their effectiveness as a combat unit, not because male werewolves are any necessarily better at being werewolfy. Krynos is fairly gender neutral when it comes to werewolf combat and all that kind of stuff. However, it's a numbers game, kind of, to say. Like, the Black Furies, just overall are a smaller tribe than they should be, because they're not allowing up to 50% of their own kinfolk who go through the transformation to join their ranks. And even when they keep the Metis around, they're not, doing it just out of love of the kid. It's both, like I was saying earlier, the other tribes aren't generally interested in taking people's metis offspring, and it's also kind of almost like a guilt reminder. It's like punishment having to raise and keep this kid around as a reminder that hey, don't get drunk and fuck other werewolves, kind of a thing. Next up, I'll jump into the Ghetto Fenris. In the modern version of 20th Anniversary Edition, they've toned it down somewhat, but there's always been kind of an angle with the Ghetto Fenris that could arguably, especially in modern times, make them among the more controversial tribes. They are Germanic, Scandinavian, and very focused on being warlike and racial purity and all that. So, going back to the thing about how these were never supposed to be good guys in a way, the werewolf characters delude themselves into thinking they're heroes. But you have a whole tribe that, in its initial conception, is basically like a neo-Nazi tribe. And like I said, they've kind of tried to pull back from that in the decades since and give them a bit more of like a Viking flavor and all that. But the Ghetto Fenris are what the Ghetto Fenris are. I'll also put the Silver Fangs on this list as the leaders of the Western Concordiate, once again self-appointed, with their focus on the having pure-bred noble werewolf bloodlines, causing to a lot of inbreeding amongst their leadership, and not to mention just the centuries of questionably bad leadership taking over other people's territories because they're the Silver Fangs. Of course, they get the best of everything. Like a lot of the mistakes that the Garou in general have made can be laid at the Silver Fang's feet. I'm not necessarily advocating that the Shadow Lords would be a better replacement. In many ways, I would say the tribe that should be in charge of the Western Concordiate and coordinating all the various tribes in their efforts should be the Children of Gaia, but obviously that's not going to happen. Fourth up, I'm going to put Wendigo. They're basically the Native American version of the Ghetto Fenris. They're very focused on maintaining like they're an all purely North American bloodline tribe of the original indigenous North American populations, which is all well and good for wanting to preserve a cultural heritage and yada yada yada. But the werewolves as a whole have this much larger stated goal. And a failure for several of these tribes to let go of their old cultural baggage stands in the way of them ever being able to all be on the same page properly and work towards something. They are their own worst enemies because of so many of them having these kinds of cultural identity hang-ups. There's others that are not on this list that do the same as well, beyond just the Ghetto Fenris and the Russian Silver Fangs and the Greek Black Furies. There's also Eastern European Shadow Lords, Uktena and Children of Gaia, Glasswalkers. They're all pretty good about kind of spreading themselves up into different populations and not being quite so ethnically attached. The Fianna are kind of like the Irish equivalent of the Ghetto Fenris, but those tribes have other things going on, and they're not quite so intense and insisting on no, you can only have sex with people who look like this so that your kids look like this and have X ancestry. The Wendigo, being stuck on that tip, whereas some people might find them a bit more sympathetic than the Ghetto Fenris. They still suffer from the exact same mental problem in that regard. And finally on this list, the Red Talons. Of the tribes on this list, the Red Talons are actually among my favorite tribes. However, to be being frankly honest about their concept, as instead of being really overly attached to a specific human ethnicity, they're just really attached to the fact that they don't like having human bloodlines amongst their tribe at all. They're purely of the lupus origin. And arguably, they're getting kind of closer and closer to just being another substitute for black spiral dancers. They might not, be overtly villainous towards other werewolves, but their attitudes towards human and human kinfolk, ranks them right up there with some of the more the older mid 20th century Ghetto Fenris that were out and about in Central Europe at the time, let's say. So, as I say, these are the 5 tribes that probably do the most damage to the efforts of the Garou nation as a whole. And in order for them to be able to all get on the same page and coordinate themselves and actually get any movement towards accomplishing their goals to varying degrees, obviously. As I said, of this list, the Black Furies are probably the most sinless. It's more they're just kind of, by being stubborn on this, they're kind of giving themselves a tactical disadvantage by reducing the overall size of their tribe. It also cuts out people who should be their kinfolk, because if you send your male son off to join another tribe, anyone that male son breeds with, their offspring, even if they're not werewolves, become kinfolk. But now that kinfolk might be ranked as like a Children of Gaia kinfolk instead of a Black Fury kinfolk. It's just short-sighted. And as far as the turf thing, is just the way they're written, I just don't really see the Black Furies, even if they're not, I don't need no Wolfman type of people. I don't really see them readily accepting, transgendered, trans woman werewolves amongst them. That's more something you probably would see with Uktena and maybe a couple other tribes, but I don't really think that's the Black Furies things. They're not explicitly lesbian in any sort of presentation or anything like that. So yeah, I guess there you go. The 5 worst werewolf tribes. Make of that as you will. Hit like and subscribe. Leave comments, and